Okay, so we are back now from our short lunch recess, and Mr. Russell Fisk once again will take over to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Uh, so we're still on working group two. We just heard from Adam Harper. Now we hear from Kevin Borgia of Sunvest about Proposal 3, Standard Offer.
Hey everybody, how are you? Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Is everybody able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I would like to share a screen here. I think I may need to request it. We'll see if it allows. Okay, can people see the slide deck there?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, again, I appreciate that, Russell. Thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to present today. Very excited that this workshop was able to come together. There's been a lot of discussion over the summer, and I'm happy to present a proposal to project selection that my company believes is the most beneficial in light of past success in this program, as well as our company's experience across the country building community solar projects throughout the U.S. So again, my name is Kevin Borgia. I'm with Sunvest Solar. I'm VP of External Affairs at Sunvest. I do a lot of public policy work for the company and have been in the renewables industry for almost 20 years, which makes me feel old to say it. Sunvest as a company, there we go. We're a national developer of community solar projects. We've been around for over 15 years, one of the largest community solar companies in the country. We were involved in phase one of the New Mexico program. We won 32 megawatts AC of projects in all three service territories, which have been moving forward. We are currently partnered now, as we've informed the commission, with Somos Solar out of Santa Fe, and we're moving these projects forward to construction and energization, hopefully before the ITC deadlines that we're all facing. And so what I put together in this proposal is a what I would say is a simpler approach. We've had great discussion today. I think Dylan's approach, Adam's approach, they really have a lot of merit. No proposal here is perfect. I think that there are benefits and drawbacks to every proposal that you'll hear today. We think that with a guiding principle of simplicity, having a standard offer, I'll refer to, by the way, throughout this presentation, interchangeably, standard offer or first come, first serve. I may kind of use both terms interchangeably, but I really mean the same thing. I think if I can misquote Churchill, standard offer is the worst proposal except for all the others, right? It's flawed, just like everything else. But we think that this proposal has the least number of flaws and has the most net benefits to the state of New Mexico and really adheres to the goals of the statute. And so a guiding principle that I put together is this is something that just, if we try to achieve too many goals, we're going to kind of end up achieving none of them. And we see this across the country in community solar programs where policymakers put conflicting mandates as far as the content of the projects or the labor that you can use or the sites that you can use or the practices. You have to have a certain number of pollinating insect plants and sheep and other things. And sometimes all of these requirements start to weigh down the program and you kind of can't achieve all of them at once. And so my urging to the commission today is just try to focus on the goals of the statute and ensure that you're achieving the goals that the statute requires for maximum benefit to the state of New Mexico and the people of the state of New Mexico. So my proposal that I outline here really seeks to do that in the best way possible. So like I said, it's a first come, first serve project selection process. I try to represent this as simply as we can through a kind of simple timeline, right? So essentially, it starts with site control. A developer, of course, before it can move forward to build a project, they're going to need to secure the site where they want to build the project. Maybe they're going to buy the land, but most likely they're going to lease the land. That's of course the first step. I think no one would argue that isn't really where this process begins. What I propose for second is that then you move into the interconnection queue. I think some of the other proposals that we've talked about today, you would go through the points-based system or some other selection process, and then only after you get selected, you'd enter into the interconnection queue. The challenge with that approach is that projects will get selected and then they'll turn around to try to get studied at a particular point in the queue. And as was discussed a lot in Dylan's presentation, there are going to be projects that are going to find out that they're not viable at that area. You just can't inject that many megawatts at that particular point in the grid. And then projects die, right? And then what happens? You have to pick something off the wait list. You have to pick the next project. Um, my proposal is do it in reverse. Do the interconnection queue first, because that's really what kills projects, is interconnection viability. If you study a project and you find out that the interconnection cost is going to be 15, $20 million, you're not going to build that project no matter what, right? Not a small, 5 megawatt site, right? Um, and so my proposal is swap it. Do the interconnection studies first, and then make project selection based on that. So again, step one, secure the site control. Step two, enter the interconnection queue and do that interconnection study. You're going to go through that study process, and you're going to get a result, and you're going to get a number, and you can decide based on that number, go or no go, right? If it comes back and it's $500,000 for a 5 megawatt site, that's really good. You'd probably say, yes, we accept, we'll pay the deposit, we'll move forward. But if not, you just withdraw the project. And some projects just die. And that's okay, right? I think the beauty and the simplicity of this process is that it takes the most important factor that kills projects across the country and makes you deal with that first. And if the project doesn't get through the process of interconnection with a viable cost, the project would die. And when I say viable cost, I mean from our perspective as a developer, right? And so this removes any this is going to first of all get the cheapest projects, because companies are going to look at their overall interconnection costs and say this number works for us, we're going to move that project forward. It also ensures that they're very shovel ready, because you're able to determine that the overall cost of reconductoring or reclosers or whatever equipment is necessary, or maybe even a new transformer, right, in certain cases, that you can shoulder those costs on the particular project economics that you're dealing with, and you can make a go no go decision at that point. And by go no go, I mean you turn around and then you'd apply to the program, right? You would that would ensure that as you go to the program administrator, you know that this is a viable project, and you wouldn't come to them with something that may not actually get built. You know that this is going to be, I mean, nothing is certain in this life, right? And in business, but you would have very significant certainty that the project would be viable and able to move forward. And so you would pay a non-refundable deposit to back that up. If you really believe in the project, you'd put some money down that you can't get back. And also at this stage, you're going to commit to low income benefits. And I think that speaks to the statutory goals. And one of the real successes of phase one of this program, every company went to the maximum of the statutory. Sorry, went to the maximum that was offered by the commission, right? 50% of the project at 27% savings. Every project went to that level, and I think we should just continue that success and just require everyone to enter into that at that point in step four. And then step five is, of course, if program capacity is still available, right? We're talking about, I think, 300 megawatts in this phase. You divide that by the utility, each utility have a fraction of that. And once that utility gets to the maximum of their capacity, they'd be permitted to stop selecting projects. Maybe we'd go a little bit above that, right? Like in case some project does die on the vine, right? Maybe you'd go 110% of the utility's allocation. But in any case, you could limit it so that then the utility isn't stuck studying tons and tons of projects that aren't going to happen. They're only going to need to study a little over their allocated capacity anyway. So, in the first round, PNM had 125 megawatts. Let's say they'd study 150 megawatts, right? Just to make up some numbers here. After they get to 150 megawatts, those projects have gone through the interconnection queue, they've paid their deposits, and they've received a contract. After that, there's no need for the utility to continue to study additional projects. We're not talking about clogged interconnection queues, because it would just be much simpler. If you move forward, the projects look good. The project costs look good. You accept and you move forward. So it's a pretty simple concept for project selection. Um, a couple additional wrinkles that I can lay out here. So again, we've got kind of the same slide. Um, you would have there are some aspects of the proposal that I put together in the red line that would prevent some of the potential downsides that were discussed in working group two. Number one, you wouldn't just have a rush into the queue, right? Because what we want to prevent, we've seen this across the country too. You want to prevent there being a gold rush, right? Where the queue opens on, January 1st and all of a sudden there's 800 megawatts in the queue, right? We don't want to have that happen, right? So you could have some kind of application limits. Colorado has done this in the past. Some other states have too. I think in my red line, I threw out that you'd be able to submit no more than 10 megawatts every 10 business days, right? So every 2 weeks, there'd be another tranche open. And again, we can talk about the details of how many megawatts over what period of time, but you'd limit it somehow so that on the front end in the interconnection queue, you're not going to have a flood of projects that go in. Companies are only going to pick their best sites, and every 2 weeks or whatever the time interval is, you're going to put your best projects forward and move them through this process. And whatever emerges at the end, you're going to add into the program. The other thing to add in would be a sub block for local businesses, right? That is a statutory goal of the law. That is something that's required. And the key goal here is, I think, to achieve two things. Number one, hit that statutory goal of growing the New Mexico domestic solar resident businesses, right? But also do so in such a way that maybe it doesn't have the unintended consequences that the first points-based system did, right? I think one of the realities of the first points-based system is that it, a lauded goal and a statutory goal that I think is very worthy ended up like becoming the center of gravity around the whole program. And the entire program ended up wrapping itself around this one goal of the local resident businesses. And that's, there's some benefits to that, right? But there's also some cost to that. I think that the challenges that were discussed earlier about having, some of these partnerships where people were kind of a sleeve, right? Or entities were not meaningfully participating, and we had we talked about Adam talked about the ice cream shops, right? You get a New Mexico ice cream shop and you put all the solar projects in that name and move it forward. The way that this would be set up, you wouldn't be able to do that. There wouldn't be partnerships, and my company benefited from a partnership with a local the first time around, to be clear. In this system, a New Mexico resident business would be the only entity that can get into that subblock, and it would ensure that those projects are able to move forward. Companies like mine would not be able to even apply into that subblock because that would be specifically set aside for New Mexico resident businesses, and that would not be partnerships, right? That would just be for the resident businesses. And like I said, when as you get to the end of this system, the utilities reach their caps, the program closes, right? We have a clear, simple path to get to the 300 megawatts, and once we get there, we stop, right? It doesn't require there to be, you know, complicated readings of applications and weighting of points and all the difficulty that we've been discussing this morning. It would just be a simpler system where you move forward, you determine if the economics work for your project, and then you move forward. And so I put this here too, just to kind of remind of what the statutory goals are specifically, and I think that my proposal achieves that, right? So this is verbatim from the CSA. You have to have 30% of the electricity produced and delivered to low-income customers and low-income service organizations. My proposal is actually 50% of that, so we go above and beyond what's required by statute. I don't think there's any entities that are arguing that the low-income goal should not be achieved, right? I think every proposal envisions a similar rate of low-income savings. And the second thing, this is the local preference language, establish a process for selection that's consistent with the New Mexico resident business procurement statute, which is listed here. And so those are the two goals that are written into the statute. What's not written into the statute is some of the things that were part of the first phase, which was, educational partnerships with nonprofit organizations, worthy goals, right? But just some things that added complexity, added cost, Again, it goes back to my original statement. If we try to achieve all the goals, we achieve none of the goals. And so this proposal kind of keeps it tight to the statutory goals. Looking specifically at the local procurement statute too, this is the verbiage from the local procurement statute. And it says that if you're going to use a points-based system, you should award additional points to resident businesses. There's a little more to it. It talks about partnerships and things like that. But the overall goal is to have a preference for New Mexico companies. I think that the way that phase one manifested was that this preference became the mandate, and the entire program oriented itself around this one aspect. So the first come, first serve system, in my view, would achieve these goals, but do so in such a way that you don't kind of warp the rest of the program. So to sum it up, like I say, I try to kind of mix my metaphors here. Occam's razor, right? The simplest solution is probably the best. It's based on national practices. We've seen states across the country move away from points-based systems and complicated things into more of a first come, first serve standard offer. There'd be a whole lot less bureaucracy in this. The commission, the procurement administrator, there would just be a lot less detail to go through. The selection process would be faster, it'd be clearer, it'd be more direct. It's set up much more on a kind of pure economic standpoint. That would be, of course, less cost for the developers, I should say, too. It would help to reduce the costs for low-income customers because we'd hit that goal of 50%, right? Which is what we're hitting in the phase one of the program, but we do it with kind of less bureaucracy and less challenges and headaches for the program participants and the administrator and the commission. And then we grow New Mexico's solar industry, which is the other statutory goal. We can, I think, talk about the size of that subblock and how large it would be. But having a subblock as opposed to a weighting system that could result in kind of a bending of the program around that one goal, I think would lead to a better outcome for the state and for the industry, and ensuring that New Mexico's local industry is able to grow while out-of-state companies can continue to participate, and moreover, that low-income customers continue to save money across the state. So that's the overall view on the first come, first serve standard offer process, and I'm happy to answer questions from the commissioners.
Okay, thank you. My question is with respect to the application limits for interconnection. What do you envision are those limits? And to provide context for my question, it's coming from a concern about overwhelming the interconnection queue, much like on the interconnection on the transmission system with the backlogs that occurred from first come, first served and led to the recent rule that FERC issued on Order 2823.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that the concept that we discussed in Working Group 2 was that I think we landed on 10 megawatts in 10 business days. And we could do that in different ways, right? It could be, I think it would be 10 megawatts AC, by the way, not DC. So it'd be kind of two maximum size projects in the New Mexico program in 10 business days. We talked about who would be best to administer that. And I think we felt that, I think there was consensus around this one point that it's probably better for the program administrator to be kind of policing that aspect of the program, just because they are the administrator, right? I mean, you'd kind of go to the program administrator, you'd get approval for your 10 megawatts in 10 days or whatever. You'd take that, green ticket or whatever we're calling it, and you'd be able to then go over to the utility, demonstrate that you have, the green ticket, and then they would accept your application into the interconnection queue. So that was the concept we discussed in Group 2.
So in that situation, is the administrator looking at other at criteria, like with respect to local partnerships, or are they looking at that to sort of determine, not determine, but maybe filter out some of the projects?
I think at that stage, the primary thing they would look at is making sure that developers aren't affiliated. So you didn't have a developer trying to create shell companies and submit uh, projects under separate shell companies. I think there would need to be affiliation rules, which the commission approved and Incline implemented last time, as far as ensuring that there wouldn't be any gaming that way. Um, but at that stage, to the point of your question, they would not assess other things um, like local preference and things like that. The local preference would be levied through the local sub block at step 5. So the winners would be, if Sunvest gets out of the interconnection process, decides to move forward, we'd only be able to apply into the mass market block. Um, Whereas affordable solar, for instance, would be able to apply to the local business sub block. And so that's how you'd levy the local preferences, by having a chunk of capacity that's only available to resident New Mexico businesses.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Nyberg, do you have any questions? No. Um, okay, I think we don't have any further questions. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So next up, also working group 2, we have proposal 4, which is a hybrid proposal. This is again Dylan Connolly. Take it away, Dylan.
Thank you. Me again. Chairman, Commissioner. So I'm going to be talking about sort of in looking at the first come, first serve option, I was trying to understand what the goals were of the first come, first serve. We can go to the next slide. And the main thing the first come, first serve does is it avoids the RFP. So we don't need to, we finish the rulemaking and you can just go straight into the interconnection process. You avoid the RFP, editing the RFP, submitting the RFP for everyone to see, and then waiting for people to fill out the RFP for a few months, and then waiting to review the RFP. Essentially, it has the ability to save anywhere from 4 to 6 months worth of time. So there's that's one of the main benefits of the first come, first serve process. The issue that I have with the first come, first serve process, and the reason why I propose this hybrid version 4, is because the order that projects are reviewed in is super important, also timing wise. What Kevin mentioned is this concept of 10 megawatts per company for 10 days, meaning that if my company could submit 10, Adam's company could submit 10, Kevin's company could submit 10. If 30 companies all submitted 10 megawatts and the first day was available, you would use up the entire 300 megawatts on that first 10 days. So now the utility just has 300 megawatts worth of projects that they need to review. And they've taken the entire capacity at that point. Now, the order of which those projects are reviewed is important because, for example, PNM, the first 10 projects they could review, kind of in parallel, but then it would take about 6 to 9 months for them to review the next 10 because they only have so many engineers to review them. So now it's whoever clicked first, whoever clicked fastest when the window opened. It's sort of like Taylor Swift tickets. You want to go see a concert, you're trying to click as fast as you can and you're beating the other people. That didn't seem like the right way to decide the fate of which projects are selected. There's also a concept of each developer in the current opportunity can only do up to 20%. So 20% of 300 megawatts That's around 12 to 13 projects. Whereas this method would only allow me to submit 2 projects before it was filled. So that means that I'm severely handicapped as a local company with this first come first serve process. So I was trying to come up with a hybrid. So if you're going to throw out all the other criteria and just do a first come first serve, why not throw out all the other criteria, but at least have the subjective criteria, at least have some parts of the original CCSA RFP, namely the part about, we can go to the next slide, the part about how local companies are selected. So yeah, we can go to the next one. So this is, the goal would be to keep the part about selecting projects based on experience, companies, and local preference. With the new, more improved version from the original version, this is basically just the CCSA version that allows that preferences for local companies with experience as opposed to shell companies. So what it would do is it would remove the subjective criteria for partnerships with local companies, the innovation section, the workforce commitments, and it would be a lot more similar to the first come first serve. That would shorten the amount of time it takes to write the RFP, review the RFP, and such. So we'd pick up a couple of months versus the longer CCSA version 1. But one other thing that was super interesting about the first come first serve is that projects are not awarded capacity in first come first serve until they sign the interconnection agreement. So we can go to the next slide. I came up with a concept that would do the same thing, which is that you score projects with the RFP, but projects aren't actually awarded capacity until they sign the interconnection agreement. And why is that important? Right now, there's at least a dozen projects that are waiting to sign their interconnection agreement because they have really bad interconnections. You know, they've got substation upgrades, they're deciding if they want to do it, trying to figure out cost sharing. And in the meantime, there's maybe projects on the wait list that have better interconnections that are not moving forward because those projects have been awarded capacity. So if instead you just scored projects with the RFP, and then projects go into the review queue based on your score, which is super important. Higher scoring projects are reviewed faster and are able to come online faster. Also, simultaneously, if you have a bad project interconnection-wise, you're just skipped over because another project behind you can go faster and sign their interconnection, and they're actually awarded capacity before you. So this creates a competition to move through the process quickly and either sign the paperwork that you're going to pay $10 million for an upgrade or remove your project because somebody else is going to beat you to the capacity. So this could be applied to version 1 or version 4. What version 4 does, in addition to the scoring change, is speeds things up a little bit by removing the subjective criteria. So it doesn't have to be reviewed subjectively and taking longer for Incline to do that. So you can go to the next one here as well. And so the concept would be similar to the interconnection process. The utilities would only be required to review up to a certain percentage of the total capacity so that they won't have to review a bunch of projects that maybe won't be awarded capacity. The queue process would be based on scoring, which would preference projects that are maybe a higher benefit to New Mexicans based on the RFP. You go to the next slide. I just wanted to point out that some of the cons didn't really make a lot of sense to me. That these were in the document there. There's not a 2-track process. This is just projects are scored, and then you go into the interconnection queue, and then you come out with an interconnection, and you're awarded capacity, or you're not. And there's, so it's less administrative judgment because they don't have to review subjective criteria. And you can go to the next slide. This is basically, again, the CCSA version with the reviewed language with this faster concept of scoring rather than selecting projects, and still maintaining the ability for local developers with experience to be awarded up to 20% of the capacity as opposed to limited to 10 megawatts, which would be, a significant reduction. So again, incentivizing project signing is, so I think I'll stand with questions.
Thank you. So in this situation, you are scoring projects, and then does that then allow them to submit a interconnection request in like tranches, or?
Yeah, so essentially what would happen is the utilities would just manage the queue the same way they did last time, and they just review the projects in the order that they're scored. So if a project submits in, they get their quality control checks as long as they're complete. They have the engineers review that project first, and then they have to review the next project. Now, projects naturally come out of the interconnection process at different times. And so, for example, like we were like the 15th selected project on one of ours, but that one went fastest because it had a very simple interconnection. And so faster, more simple interconnections naturally come out first and sign their interconnections first and get awarded capacity. Whereas more complicated ones that require coming before the commission to deal with wielding charges, those ones naturally just don't move forward because they're not going to beat out the other projects. And so they naturally don't want to work on those as developers.
How long does a project have to decide whether to sign the interconnection agreement?
Typically it's 30 days, but there's a number of ways that developers can request for more time, and it essentially becomes sort of an unlimited kick the can down the road. And this, again, is a process that would eliminate that as a methodology of squatting on the capacity. And it would allow projects that were slightly lower scored to just bypass those projects that are less viable.
Yeah, and so I was just trying to think about whether the project, I mean, the community solar rules would create that deadline to sign an interconnection agreement or withdraw. Or are you talking, that the transmission provider's tariff rules would be in place at that point?
Yeah, so Rule 568 is just our standard interconnection rule, and that's the process that we employ. And so a lot of those are guideline rules, and you can also, like I mentioned, you can ask for more time. You can say, as long as you're being responsive with the utility, you essentially can postpone nearly indefinitely. There might be, so projects have,
Right.
and there's a reason why we're 2.5 years in and we're just turning on our first projects when there's I think not even maybe 2/3 have signed interconnection agreements, and they're blocking maybe other viable projects further down the line. This would solve that. Those projects wouldn't just be bypassed by better projects.
Right. Yeah, no, so I get that. I guess what I was asking is, would we here be creating a new rule that would then have them make that decision or withdraw?
Yeah, we wouldn't be adding a new rule in that regard. It would just, so what this won't solve is if a project is first on a substation and they haven't decided if they're going to sign or not, the project second on the substation would still be waiting for that first project, as you mentioned. But a third project on a different feeder and different substation would just bypass them.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't completely solve that issue.
Right.
I think separately from this, working on maybe some addendums maybe to 568 or clarifications or an order to, there's no requirement technically that the utilities maintain the statutory requirements for interconnection time reviews. Those are just guidelines. There's no penalties there's associated with those. There are technically penalties on the developer side because you get kicked out if you don't meet your timelines. But as I mentioned, you can usually just ask for more time.
Okay, thank you. And just to provide my reaction, um, it resonates with me when you're talking about just clicking, being able to click the fastest, because this is an issue that I worked on a lot in order to that when I worked at FERC 2003 and 2023, trying to fix that problem where whoever had, the queue position just became so valuable. And so that's what I want to make sure that we don't do here. And then the other problem that you mentioned as well is that, there's project waiting behind somebody else that's not making a decision. And so, yeah, thanks for your presentation on that.
You mentioned that you go to the utility for a lot of engineering analysis to determine whether or not they can, I guess, accept the energy. And my question is, first of all, do the parties asking for that review have to pay for that review? And then the second question would be, if not, should they, and would it maybe further limit some of the problems that you've seen?
Generally, it's around $50,000 in P&M to do that route study, and that's paid for by the developer. It's maybe 25 in Excel and 15 in APE. It depends on the contractor that they're using. Those are essentially pass-through costs from the utility directly to the developer. So that initial process does a feasibility with that, and then the feasibility explains which upgrades are needed, and they make an estimate based on, looking at past costs on what those costs would be.
So even with those fairly substantial costs, it's not a winnowing factor in people standing in line trying to get something looked at to see if their project would move forward.
Absolutely. If left to our own devices, we would spam the utilities with, hundreds of those. One of the things that was really intentional was asking the utilities not to review those projects until we all have a fair chance to do it at the same time. Because, spending an extra $50,000 to get advanced information and potentially move 6 months faster if my project's selected is a good business savvy move in some cases. But that does utilize resources from the utilities and potentially diverts it to projects that won't be scored highly.
So if everybody's, say there's 4 companies that are looking at maybe the same area, are all 4 paying the same fee to have their particular project looked at?
If it's on the same feeder in the same substation, sometimes they might split the costs. For example, you mentioned being on the same, Chairman Aguilar, you mentioned being on the same substation is potentially an issue, but oftentimes a second project on the substation can actually be helpful because that maybe they can share the costs and they can take a $10 million cost and make it 5. However, if the first one's not willing to pay for it, the second one's probably not willing to pay for it if the first one drops out. So in general, just bypassing that altogether with a whole different project in different places, actually what this version achieves and is maybe more expedient and more cost effective.
Thank you. That's a question I have.
Thank you, Dylan. Okay, so we're moving on to my group, working group 3, regarding interconnection cost sharing and consolidated billing. With proposal 1, the interconnection cost sharing proposal, we have Nick Bowman from CCSA. Nick, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Aguilera and Commissioner Nybert. First off, I wanted to say thank you to the commissioners and staff for hosting today's workshop and for all the work you've done on the state's community solar program. I'm Nick Bowman, Senior Manager of Markets and Research for the Coalition for Community Solar Access. CCSA is a national trade association representing more than 120 solar companies, businesses, and nonprofits working to expand customer choice and access to solar for all American households and businesses through community solar. Today, I'm presenting a proposal for interconnection cost sharing that was created by CCSA with additions from Working Group 3 members, including RIA New Mexico and OE Solar. Next slide, please. So why amend the community solar rule? The current interconnection cost sharing rule 17.9-568.19 says the commission may determine on a case-by-case basis whether the cost of distribution system upgrades necessary to interconnect one or more generating facilities may be eligible for some form of cost sharing. I believe that only one interconnection cost sharing proposal has been considered by the PRC to date. The PRC determined that commission approval wasn't necessary as the two companies had agreed to share the upgrade costs. But there may be scenarios where multiple companies are involved or the time frame for agreement between companies is months or even years apart. This proposal would provide greater guidelines and clarity to the cost sharing process. Next slide, please. So what the amendment does, this amendment introduces clear definitions of key terms. It makes select distribution upgrades automatically eligible for pro rata cost sharing. It establishes a 50% mobilization threshold before construction proceeds. I've got a little bit more about that on the next slide. And it caps final contributions from developers for interconnection costs at 125% of the original utility estimate, but it also includes a force majeure clause in case there are extenuating circumstances. The proposal also allows third parties to perform interconnection upgrades themselves, provided that all equipment and materials meet the utility specifications and applicable standards. Next slide, please. So here are some of the key definitions that are introduced. Eligible upgrade is a distribution grid or software upgrade that upgrades that expand hosting capacity beyond a single project. A trigger project is the first project that requires a grid upgrade and starts the cost sharing process. The mobilization threshold and mobilization window define how much money is committed to by developers and how much time that window is open and is needed before construction proceeds. We suggest 50% of total costs for mobilization threshold, but open to other suggestions there. The cost sharing contribution is the per kilowatt pro rata payment by interconnecting customers. And the payback period is the time for DER customers to cover the upgrade's full value. Next slide, please. How it works. So the trigger project chooses to either initiate cost sharing, pay the full cost of the interconnection upgrade, which is effectively more or less the status quo, or withdraws its application. The proposal would create a petition process where utilities and developers can seek rate base or rider recovery for any costs not covered by developers. This would require a 30-day negotiation first. And utilities would be required to post hosting capacity maps and quarterly updates. Those hosting capacity maps would include things such as the mobilization threshold status, the payback period or payback window, the cost per megawatt or per kilowatt of upgrades, and the available capacity at different locations on the grid. Next slide, please. And so some of the major proposed changes, the proposal creates guidelines for automatic eligibility for cost sharing. It spells out distribution upgrades that expand hosting capacity. For example, substation transformers, switch gears, smart meters automatically qualify for pro rata cost sharing. The process for trigger projects already hit on this, that you can they can choose to initiate cost sharing or pay the full costs or withdraw. And since working group 3 was about changes to phase 1 of the community solar program, we have language in here saying that phase 1 community solar projects are eligible. We also include that the total cost, interconnection upgrade costs are capped at 125% of the original estimate to protect interconnection customers. And I already mentioned the force majeure clause, which says that if there are acts of God, things that are outside of the utility's control, that there would obviously be some flexibility on that 125% cap. Next slide, please. Some other proposed changes would be the ratepayer cost sharing petition process. Utilities, developers, or subscriber organizations may petition for rate-based or rider treatment if costs are not fully covered. This would require those entities, those organizations, to engage in 30 days of good faith negotiation before filing. If all sides are agreeable, then the utility or the developer could submit the cost sharing proposal. And then the transparency requirements. This is the hosting capacity maps that I mentioned on the previous slide. This is something that CCSA members have shared, that is hosting capacity maps are a high priority for them. This would be a very helpful piece of information when planning out projects and planning out interconnection. Next slide, please. So this proposal tries to balance out competing interests. Sometimes the utilities and developers have different interests or goals. We try to the extent possible, to come to consensus. And so some of the positives or pros of this proposal is that it streamlines interconnection cost sharing by specifying the exemption criteria that would allow for automatic interconnection cost sharing, but also retain the case-by-case approval process for maybe more complex cost sharing arrangements. Some of the cons, PNM argues that utilities and customers would unnecessarily shoulder community solar facilities DER upgrade costs. This was the proposal that said that if all of the costs are not covered by community solar companies, that the utility could rate base some of those uncovered costs. That would only be if it was found to be in the public interest that the community solar provided greater benefits. This was the closely related to the discussion earlier about the PRC finding that community solar benefits the public and would be able to assign up to 3% of costs to utilities. I think we explored that topic. The commissioners explored that topic at length, and don't want to continue to beat a dead horse there. P&M argues that the proposal conflicts with the guiding statute by creating discriminatory treatment that favors community solar developers over other DER developers. From CCSA's vantage point, we do not see it that way. This interconnection cost sharing process would work for front of the meter and behind the meter projects. Overall, I would say the level of consensus in the working group was partial consensus. Companies in the community solar development space were generally supportive of the proposal, but then, excuse me, utilities were generally cautious or opposed to the proposal. And we did conduct a survey of the working group to gauge support, and found near consensus. I believe the utilities were the primary opponents. Let's see, and with that, we can go to the next slide. And I will stand for questions.
I do have one question. You mentioned having the utilities do certain analysis and let you know where maybe they can host these facilities. And who do you suggest and how do you suggest that those costs be recovered by the utility? Who pays and by what mechanism?
Commissioner Nyberg, thank you for the question. It's a great question. I'm not sure that we discussed that in the working group. I do know that in other states, utilities do provide hosting capacity maps to developers. I can look into those states and see who is generally paying for that, and share that with the commission after today's meeting, if that would be helpful.
Well, I talked with Mr. Conley about the fees for doing the interconnection work. Could that be built into those types of charges? Even though the ones really paying it would be the parties who actually move forward with trying to get an interconnection, but is there some other mechanism to reimburse the utilities for the time and effort that they're expending to produce the reports or maps or whatever that you presented? I don't know what's fair, but I mean, there's got to be some mechanism to do that. Otherwise, those costs get shifted to the ratepayers of the utility.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Nyberg. I do believe it would be possible to have the community solar companies chipping in, covering the costs for the hosting capacity maps, either through application fees or included in the interconnection upgrade costs that they pay if they choose to proceed. Yeah, interconnection fees is something akin to those. I think could help the utilities cover the cost of operating those hosting capacity maps.
And you talked about maybe revising those periodically. Would the obligation on the utility to engage in that work terminate when the full subscriptions or when the maximum subscriptions have been let, or are you seeing this as an ongoing activity that the utilities must perform?
I believe that we're seeing it as an ongoing process that the utilities perform. I believe that's how it is generally run in other states that have community solar or other distributed energy resources on the grid.
Well, if that's the answer, then you might try to think about how long-term that recoupment of those costs would be made and by whom. Because it couldn't just be through what I suggested, the interconnection service, because that will be terminated at some point. So if it's ongoing, then maybe we need to think about that. And your input on that issue might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, Commissioner Nyberg.
And I'll provide the other side of that is I think that hosting capacity should be a regular standard thing that the utility is doing as it benefits everybody who is trying to interconnect. I think once you start assigning those costs to specific people, then your expectations of that hosting capacity start to increase, and then I start thinking about the cap that was mentioned during the presentation. Anyway, to me, it just it seems like the utility should be providing this information just more frequently. And as an example, MISO, one of the RTOs, has a heat map that shows that information at all times. And to me, it just seems like a standard thing that should be provided. But with respect to the cap, how would that be handled? I mean, when I was looking at the presentation, I could imagine that the utilities would oppose that, and also the petition that you proposed. But can you elaborate more on their concerns and what you heard from that, aside from what you already mentioned that PNM noted?
Yes, thank you for the question, Commissioner Aguilera. This was included in the proposal because we've been hearing from our members that they're interacting with the utilities. They're being given one estimate for what the interconnection cost will be, and then when the upgrades are complete, sometimes the final costs are 150%, 200% higher than what was originally quoted, which is hard for our member companies to budget and plan accordingly when there's such a big delta between the original estimate and the final costs. As to how the costs could be recovered, yes, the utilities expressed concern with that cap, and were opposed to that 125% cost cap. We at CCSA we would be open to maybe a higher number, like 150%, if that would help get the support of the utilities. But any costs that were not covered by the community solar developers could potentially, if the commission says that community solar is in the public interest and non-subscribers could subsidize up to 3% of the costs for the overall benefit of the community solar program. That's another potential avenue for cost recovery. Having said that, I'm not sure that we had detailed discussions about cost recovery in the working group.
Oh, Arthur.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to address something that Commissioner Nybert said, I just want to point out that the issue of hosting capacity is an overlap with other initiatives that the commission is pursuing, in particular, the grid planning or distribution resource planning rulemaking that is currently under consideration specifically involves hosting capacity as part of the distribution planning process. And the reason for that is that hosting capacity maps provide value not just to community solar, but to any party, any individual that wants to put solar on their rooftop or develop some other kind of distributed energy resource. So that's one of the reasons why it, in the conception that's in the DER, goes into the planning process, which means that the costs of conducting that analysis are socialized across all ratepayers or ratepayers affected. There may be some classes of ratepayers that are not affected by it. The second overlap is with the economic development initiative that the commission is looking into. Hosting capacity doesn't just go to generators attaching to the system, but anybody attaching to the system. And it would be much better if the utilities could balance new load against new generation in specific areas, which is one of the thrusts of the economic development idea. So I just wanted to call that out, is that nothing exists in a vacuum, is that things that we are considering in community solar necessarily also are being considered in other proceedings.
And also, I think if the idea is to get the developers to try to site these in the most cost-effective places, then you want them to know where those places are, where there is already capacity to be able to accommodate them.
Yeah, I guess when I heard the presentation, I thought that the ask was for specifically to deal with community solar issues. I guess if there are other benefits of that, then I can see spreading it to maybe all the ratepayers. Do we allow recovery of, I suppose in a rate case, we would allow recovery of those costs if we're going to require that. But under current rules, none of the utilities in New Mexico currently provide that type of information.
It's not easy to develop, and we have been working for a number of years, particularly with PNM, working with the national labs to use the latest technologies and modeling software in order to identify where DER projects would optimally go. And the costs of that participation in that are really just the time and effort by the utilities interconnection staff to work with the national labs. And of course, that just gets put into rates overall. So hosting capacity is not easy. And in some states, it's very, very granular. I mean, it gets down to every circuit or every feeder level. We're not necessarily looking at that, but it is something that is a modern way of understanding the utility system. And now we have better tools to do it. And the argument is, who pays for that? And currently it does get paid throughout the rate base.
Well, I was just going to suggest, since that is an open issue in the grid mod proceeding and the record in that proceeding is closed, maybe I was going to suggest moving on to something different.
Mr. Chairman, can I just respond to something regarding what Commissioner Nyberg was saying about the broader, the applicability of this potentially to other types of distributed energy. One thing I did raise when this was raised in our working group was that this proposal applies to interconnection of any distributed energy resource. So my feeling is this would be better placed within the interconnection rule because this isn't limited to community solar. Now, the Act requires that community solar projects be be subject to the same interconnection or similar interconnection regime that other projects are. And they are. The community solar projects are subject to the interconnection rule. So if this replacing the interconnection rule, it could apply to all kinds of distributed energy resources, and it would apply to community solar as well. But here, I think that maybe this doesn't belong to community solar unless it will be limited to community solar, because this is a narrower rule.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, we know we're going to have at least a couple of rate cases coming up. If we're going to do something, seems that the utilities ought to know that maybe those costs ought to be captured in the rate case instead of waiting 2 or 3 years down the road to capture those costs. But anyway, I'm glad that I have a better understanding of what that is and the breadth of it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Nick. So up next we have Alex Passanen from Solstice. He's going to discuss the first of the two consolidated billing proposals that we have. Alex, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Fisk. Chairman Aguilera, Commissioner Nybert, staff, thanks for all the time you're spending with us today. I'm Alex Passanen, Manager of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Solstice. And a lot of people on the call know this, but Solstice is a subscription provider. We helped enroll that first energized project in the program that Dylan Connolly mentioned earlier. And we are in full swing enrolling projects in all 3 territories. We also all had the chance, our whole team, to be in Albuquerque a few weeks ago to see local partners and subscribers. And I can confirm that people are very excited about the program. So appreciate all the work that everyone has done thus far, and look forward to moving forward on phase 2. So the proposal in front of you here for the introduction of consolidated billing, which is as Working Group 3 was set up as part of the phase 2 rulemaking, but pieces that would be retroactive to phase 1 project. So we can talk about the mechanics of that. But at first, I'll kind of summarize where Working Group 3 got, and we did end up reaching, I think, near consensus, as I was put in the report, in the larger stakeholder survey on this proposal, and broad support from all of the stakeholders in our working group, other than a few of the folks from the utilities. Though I will note that PNM did via their bench request response and via the working group, and also via the proposal that we're going to see from Alaric next on the report. They have recognized that there are huge benefits to delivering a consolidated bill for community solar, and we appreciate that, along with all the work that their team and the other utility teams have done thus far. So, as you should be able to see in the description of the proposal there in the report, the big focus of this consolidated billing proposal is that it enables customers to enroll in community solar without giving their payment information to third-party providers like Solstice, and then having to pay that second bill that comes a month or 2 after their utility bill, which has those community solar credits on it. That is, I think everyone here has heard this at least a couple of times now, but that's by far the most critical element in terms of strengthening accessibility in this program. It's a core element to all of the community solar programs that I've worked on that have, ambitious and laudable commitments to serving underserved and low-income customers. This is really the best way to remove the #1 barrier to enrolling customers, and provides a more transparent product. You see the credits and the savings that are associated with each other right on your utility bill. Providers can serve customers who really need utility bill assistance the most, and it allows them to continue paying their bills however they were doing so previously. Even if that's with cash for unbanked households, no matter how they pay their utility bill, they keep paying it that same way. And obviously you can imagine that's a very different experience than the dual bill products that we're working with today. Specifically the mechanism that is in this consolidated billing proposal is called net crediting, which, in addition to those customer-facing benefits, it also substantially lowers the enrollment costs, both for initial enrollments before the project is turned on, and then also by reducing the rate at which customers need to be replaced One of the biggest reasons you see customers fall off projects in dual bill projects is that they have defaulted payment methods. That's no longer an option in this scenario. And generally, for a lot of the reasons I described already, it's just a purely positive experience. There's really there's way less room for error for the customer to have unintended consequences and then, by their own accord, cancel their subscription. Dual bill community solar is also, that's true the vast majority of the time. It's a good experience, but you do also see unpredictable billing scenarios. There's very limited visibility into bills from the provider perspective. So you run into things like it's not compatible for someone to get their LIHEAP funds and get their community solar credits and then get their second bill, or they're on budget billing and it doesn't work together well. So just in the dual bill scenario, beyond the whole collecting payment method and having a second bill, there's also a decent number of edge cases where customers end up not having the desired experience. And that's obviously very burdensome for the type of households that this program is designed to serve. And it's something that you can avoid with net crediting. I'm sure there'll be questions about this and we'll have a chance to talk about it, but of course, time and money will be needed to transition to consolidated billing. But I also, I'll talk about this more, but I appreciate that this program is very new. But the projects that are coming online right now are going to be delivering savings for 25 years. And then, of course, there are going to be more projects on the way. So I think it's clear the long-term benefit of moving toward this is huge, especially as the cost savings that the developers will experience can contribute to deeper benefits for subscribers, more projects. And there's a mechanism in here for the utilities to recover their costs for putting the system in place. And that's, I'll touch on this, but it's unrelated to the existing administrative cost rider, and it will be kind of baked into the proposal that's in the report in front of you. In those proposed regs, it's very prescriptive about the order of operations on the utility side for how this works and the reporting that would be required to make sure that the data exchange is clear and providers still understand the experience customers are having without seeing their bills. Well, one key point I think that will end up coming up a lot on this is not a third-party transaction akin to retail supply in other states. We're talking about a calculation where providers submit a discount percentage for the customer. That discount percentage is just applied against the monetary credit amount that the utilities are all already calculating in the dual bill scenario. And two of the really key pieces, and why I think the proposal, this specific net crediting proposal is well designed, is that one, in line with what's currently being offered in the program, every subscriber on consolidated billing is guaranteed savings. So that discount percentage that you're submitting to the utilities always has to be greater than 0. I think Commissioner or Chairman Aguilera mentioned this earlier, but it would be extremely challenging, if not impossible, to sell community solar at a premium. People are not going to enroll, even not just the low-income customers. This is a savings product for all customers. And I don't believe there's any statutory reason that in implementing a net crediting mechanism, you couldn't say that mandatory savings is a piece of that. I know that that's not in the statute for all customers, I don't believe, even though that is what's happening in practice. But that's a piece that I included in here because that's a key kind of underpinning why this works so well. The second key piece for how this kind of function is that the households are they're paying their community solar subscription charge out of the bill credits they're receiving. So if you're an income qualified customer, you're getting a 28% discount right now. So you get $60 in bill credits in 1 month. So your fee is about $43. You're getting $17-ish in savings. And my perspective, and the majority of stakeholders in our group and who participated in the survey, is that it's a common sense structure. If you're getting that $60 in bill credits in the month and you're paying $43, you should just pay that $43 out of the 60. You're receiving in that month. It simplifies the transaction, completely transforms the customer experience because they're not dealing with that second bill. They're not kind of confused about which charge is for which credits on their bill. So those are two really key pieces that I wanted to highlight. Obviously, there's more in there, but I wanted to make those very clear. And on the utility side, like I said, they're already calculating those monetary credits every month. They just apply that discount percentage. They apply the resulting savings to the customer bill, and then they remit the other portion minus an administrative fee. So that can be structured as 1% of the credits in that month, for example. That's a pretty common approach in other jurisdictions. So the utilities are collecting every month for every customer that they are serving on consolidated billing. And under this proposed mechanism, an entire project would always have to be consolidated billing. You wouldn't pick and choose from a provider perspective who's going to get a second bill, who's going to get the consolidated bill. The utilities would continue to collect that administrative fee every month, every project for the lifetime of the project. So there's a lot to be said in terms of like, okay, they have upfront costs. When are they going to be able to be sure that they've actually recovered up to that point? But this is a cost recovery mechanism that's worked really well in a lot of markets. I know it's something we already began discussing with the utilities via the bench request. And it's not lost on me that there are a different number of projects in each territory. If you have a similar amount of fixed costs, it's going to be different in terms of how you're going to recover that across projects. But to some extent, the cost should also be scaled to how many projects you're providing this service for. So of course, we need to get more in the weeds of what that's going to look like, and it's part of the regs that are proposed here, which is time to come up with proposed systems, proposed costs, and kind of transparency into what the utilities are saying when they take a closer look behind the hood. I also want to note that, again, I mentioned early on, this program is obviously very new. We just had the first project turn on, and it has taken a lot of programs across the country that are similar longer to get here. But also those programs just started a long time ago. We had fewer lessons learned from programs that served a lot of income qualified customers and had all these other benefits that are required here. So I think that's really unique for this program, is that it has started off already making those commitments. It also doesn't allow providers to serve large commercial kind of anchor accounts, which is what we call, a large business that subscribes to, say, 40% of the project in other markets. It's very common elsewhere. It's a helpful way to kind of, solidify the financing and anchor the project and make it more approachable from a financing and development perspective. So I think the fact that it doesn't have that, everyone is serving 50% of the project to low-income customers at a really high discount. It's already really exciting that we've got a lot of projects, or at least a good handful of projects moving, but this would be is particularly well suited for a net crediting situation like this because of those reasons as well. Lastly, I just wanted to quickly know, I know it's obviously different in every state, and it's not always productive to talk about, oh, this market did this market did that, but in this case, just because so many of these other programs have iterated over time, give a quick history on that, which is that New York first developed this. Their commission adopted it in 2019. And then in the last couple of years, it's been adopted in New Jersey and Maryland. All the Maryland utilities are about to formally launch this in January of this coming year. In Illinois, they adopted a slightly different mechanism. The Illinois Commerce Commission, they adopted more of a billing and remittance dynamic, which is kind of like a pass-through, which I'm sure we'll also discuss further in the rulemaking. But they also passed this energy storage bill last week that included an update to the statutory language, which now aligns the Illinois model with what you have in New York and Maryland and New Jersey, and what I'm proposing here, what we're proposing here. So also in Minnesota, Xcel Energy launched this earlier this year as well. I think I'll leave it there for now. I'm sorry I didn't have slides. I hope oh yeah, okay, I'm on the screen at least. I'll leave it there for now. Happy to answer questions. I know Alaric is also going to talk through a proposal that PNM's been thinking about, but thanks for the time.
Thank you. It may not ever occur, but what would a bill look like if the subscriber is to receive money? In other words, more energy was produced than their bill from the utility.
Yeah, so if they say they had a low usage month, then the way that their subscription size, so if they got more in that month, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for the question. It's similar to what would happen in a dual bill environment too, which is that there are already provisions where that banked energy rolls over to a following month. It is much less likely actually in the dual bill scenario because the utility is taking out the net credit and they are applying that smaller amount to the bill because they're converting the kilowatt hours to the monetary credit and then applying it to the bill. Much less likely that you're going to have rollover credits. But totally fair question. And that's something that, typically we would have to hash out in the tariff phase when utilities are figuring out how does that actually work inside their billing system. Something that PNM has already worked with providers like us a lot on in the current scenario that we have is how are they tracking that? How do they make sure that we're not over subscribing customers so they're not on an annual basis getting more kilowatt hours than they're consuming? So I think generally it would actually work very similarly to how it works now, but obviously with a little bit of tweaking in terms of the utility systems and them tracking that.
Does the proposed revision to the rule deal with that situation? And if not, it seems to me that there ought to be not only the rollover, but the rollover ought to be for an extended period. But certainly there should be a true up maybe at least once a year, or at least at some minimum threshold amount, $100, whatever. Does the rule as you guys presented, does it deal with those issues?
Well, let me look. I don't think this section of the rule does, but the rule already does include the cap of the 100% historical annual usage. So that is something that the utilities already are monitoring and can reject allocations based on that. So your point is, I totally hear that. There could be an additional element of control in this net crediting scenario where I agree that they don't need to roll on forever. There should be a point at which they are cashed out, and they could be cashed out at a different rate. But in general, that mechanism should exist. It already does exist in the rule. Perhaps there's room to either clarify or add a kind of specific call out in this section, but it should be managed by the fact that that rule does already still exist in terms of capping the sizing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I will also, it's very possible that would be a bit cleaner to include a provision on that in this piece. So I would totally take that back. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point to look at that, Commissioner Nyberg. And just want to focus on one of the things that was said is that the program is intended to cover your usage, not more than that. But yeah,
absolutely.
looking at the existing rules for how net metered is covered, those rules exist. But I do think you have a good point that there are nuances here that need to be considered and reflected.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks so much.
And now we have the proposal 3, the consolidated billing proposal that was generally supported by the utilities. And we have Albert Babé from PNM. Albert, you can go ahead.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Excuse me. Chairman Aguilera, Commissioner Nyberg, thank you very much. Mr. Fisk, as well as the leader of this working group, thank you for herding the cats to get us here today. Before I jump into this proposal, I also want to say, just because today we're talking a lot about the things we maybe don't agree on, you've heard a couple of times that the first sites have already been interconnected. So the very first site was interconnected on September 24th in Belen. We have interconnected a second site on October 28th in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And we expect the first bill credits to start going out to customers next week. So there's a lot of progress behind the scenes and a lot of good handshakes taking place. And so I just want to sort of set the stage for that as well. There's a lot of good collaboration. I think this working group and hopefully this proposal is reflective of that. So I didn't have anything else that I wanted to like slog through as far as the policy. I thought really my value add here today would be to provide a chronicle of how we got here, some of the context that went into creating this this proposal, and why I think this gives us the capability to be successful in the long run. So the last time I had the chance to address this body, I was actually outlining the reasons why consolidated billing was too complex, too costly, too time consuming, and probably why it shouldn't be in the rule. And yet here I am with a proposal for consolidated billing backed by the utilities. So how did we get here? As I mentioned, I think this is a product of the collaboration from the working group. While Alex Passon and Solstice had the proposal that they discussed, originally we sort of started being against that again due to the time, the complexity and the costliness. However, as Mr. Settlage said earlier today, one of our guiding principles has been trying to make this easy for customers, easy to understand, easy to implement, easy to have as a program that's going to last for 25 years. And credit where it's due, and Alex was very, very helpful in this. I'm looking up as if he's on the TV screen above me. Credit where it's due, he was very helpful in providing some case studies. We looked at other markets, and we all agreed that there were clear benefits for customers in a consolidated billing environment. And therefore, that's not something that we should push against, rather something that we should embrace and figure out how can we be successful to do so. However, for the context in doing so, we still disagree on the specifics. Each one of the three investor-owned utilities has significantly different billing systems, is going to face very unique challenges in implementation, is going to face unique costs and timelines to implement just based on where they are in their either in their implementation or with their experience in other markets. So what we tried to do here was create a pathway towards consolidated billing that would take those considerations into account, but would still be moving the ball forward to deliver those benefits to customers. So, for example, it would start with each utility coming up with a design for consolidated billing. I will note that consolidated billing in and of itself is not a one-size-fits-all definition. So this would allow each utility to, with a minimum set of requirements, come up with a definition and a scope of work for consolidated billing, what would need to be included. And then the commission would have the ability to approve that, making sure that it complies with all of the regulations and statutes. At which point, once it's approved, then the utility would be on a timeline to take that back to our development teams and then create an implementation plan. One thing I've learned over doing this for the last number of years is our IT department is very undervalued. This is a huge IT undertaking. I didn't work with them as much on many of the other programs that I implement until I've been involved in community solar. Even in the dual billing scenario, the data transfer, putting this on the bill, changing our bill as it is today is incredibly complex. So I talk every day now with our IT department. This proposal would allow us to have approved design specifications going back to the subject matter experts to create detailed plans, timelines, and cost estimates for implementation. At which point, the utilities would have to report quarterly on that status. Again, each utility's timeline is going to be different. So rather than taking a top-down approach and saying, okay, on January 1, you all have to be able to do this, that, to be very frank, may or may not be possible. This would allow the utilities to go back, see where they are, have the people that are actually doing the work, present a proposal, and then we can work towards that timeline. Some of the other notable differences here are things like payment waterfalls. The other proposal for consolidated billing would have the subscriber organizations getting paid first, even in instances of partial payment. That is one thing that in our proposal we would advise against. So, let me say. Oh, and the other thing that is made clear here in this proposal as well is that the costs for consolidated billing would be incurred by the subscriber organizations, but only once consolidated billing is implemented. So utilities would have to create a regulatory asset or a similar mechanism to incur those costs over the development timeline. And then once those benefits are delivered both to customers through simplification of the program, but really as well to subscriber organizations, because in essence, the utility is taking on the billing requirement or the billing responsibilities of a private unregulated third party, which we've never done before. And so the subscriber organizations would be paying the utilities for that. So I think that lays it out in a nutshell. I really just wanted to, again, provide some of the context for how did we shift. It really comes down to, we understood that there are clear customer benefits for moving forward with consolidated billing. However, every utility is going to be unique, and this creates a pathway forward for all of us to do it and be successful in doing so. So with that, I will take any questions.
Wow, you've come a long way. No, I really appreciate the utilities going back and looking at this issue from a different angle. So I think that's great. I'm kind of wondering, just with respect to the different, how the software would talk to each other. So would the developers be acquiring the same software in your footprint, or?
No, in this case, I don't think that there would be any. So, and I'm spitballing here again, I'm not an IT professional, so please take.
Neither am I, so you can say.
Okay, good. I'm an engineer, but not that kind of engineer. So the way that I envision this is the subscriber organization would simply be informing the utility of, here are the subscribers and here is the amount that will go on their bills, and the utility would take on the rest of that billing requirement. So the utility would be responsible for receiving all of the payment, both for the utility bill and for the both applying the community solar credit, billing for the community solar subscription, and then remitting that payment, whatever payment is due, out to the subscriber organization.
Okay.
So I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, there are already data transfer sites that we're doing to do this data, but it's not necessarily that the two teams have to have the same software and they all have to play nice. It'll be a data transfer, and we would do all the billing.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Everett, do you have any questions on this?
Not really a question. He heard my comment a moment ago, and again, I think at least reading it, it doesn't appear to be covered here either. And it just seems to be a hole that may need to be filled if regardless of which way we go. I do think we need to address that one issue, and there does need to be some pretty wide parameters, because the utility shouldn't be sending out 38-cent checks.
Right.
That costs a lot of money to send out a check of that. But on the other hand, at the end of the year or whatever, or if there's so much money built up, there needs to be a mechanism to take care of those situations. And at least what I see here,
Yeah.
that's not addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, I know in other programs, I believe this was in the rec purchase program, there was internally a policy we would cut a check only once it got to $25. The issue with that is that customers often don't want to cash a check for $25. They want to wait for it to build up, and so then we get return checks. And so I would tend to agree there should be a clear policy about when and what's the right amount, and how do we do that true up. Currently, we're just going to be monitoring for oversubscription amounts over the current time, without, not that there's any teeth around that necessarily. But I will also note, it definitely won't be on a monthly basis, just because of the mismatch between usage and solar generation, right? So we would absolutely expect, say in the shoulder months like now, it's been lovely. So there's a lot of good solar production, but there's not a lot of energy consumption. And so you're going to see those bill credit amounts be larger, likely, than the utility bills, until we start to get, if you have electric heating, maybe into the colder months. And then of course in the summer. And so you'll always see a little bit of a mismatch, and the idea is that they will even out over a year. And so maybe it's a year time frame to evaluate.
I should have asked this earlier, but Commissioner Aguilera, pointed out that the subscription amount should be equal to, or maybe about what the consumer is consuming each month. But what happens, is there any mechanism to recalculate their percentage or whatever if month after month after month or year after year they are in a situation where their production is greater than their consumption? Is there a true-up mechanism generally, or does it just continue that way where you'll be cutting a check to them every year or something?
Yeah, not currently, no. There were some proposals, I believe by PNM, I won't speak for anyone else, through, I want to say phase 1 of the community solar proceeding, about some checks on number of months of oversubscription, but those were not included in the final order. And so, however, that, right now it's, as I mentioned earlier, our plan currently is to monitor. If we're seeing that widespread, then that's something we could bring to everyone's attention. However, I would also say, I think that everyone, regardless of, I won't even say which side of the aisle, because this is a team sport, right? So thank you for being referee. But, everyone from wherever you sit in this industry has a vested interest in making it successful long term. And so I don't think that there's anyone that would, willingly or they're not going to try and overdo that, because it might be a short-term game, but it's not going to serve the program long term. So it's something that we're going to monitor and we would report on if necessary.
Well, I might make the suggestion, if that issue is not addressed anywhere in the rules, that may be another issue that does need to be addressed, because the whole goal was not to have this as a profit center for any subscriber, but it was basically to try to offset their energy consumption and lower their energy costs. So if we have situations where, I wouldn't say month after month, but certainly year after year, there's some misalignment, there ought to be some mechanism for the developer to maybe make some adjustments among their subscribers so that it gets back into their actual consumption range.
Absolutely.
Just a thought.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I address that? So Commissioner Nyberg, the act actually requires that each subscription shall be sized to supply no more than 100% of the subscriber's average annual electricity consumption. So that is the idea. And I see you raised two issues. One, well, what if that average changes from year to year? How often will we check that? That's something we need to think about. I'm not sure if Christian Casillas might, their group dealt with some subscription organization reporting, and that might be a place to include something like that. In fact, they may have already, but Christian will be on soon. Alex. Okay. Yes, please. Alex.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. And first of all, thanks, Alec, for all that too. I echo Alec's sentiment that we agree on a lot of this, and it's been a pleasure to work on all of this. And I think there's still a lot of pieces in your proposal that I agree with, and I think it seems like there are a bunch of pieces in mine that you agree with. So quickly on this, Commissioner Nyberg, thanks for raising this again. I agree. Russell just described that as the rule that I was referring to, but Alec's point is also completely true that there aren't really formal teeth in how that should be assessed and how often it should be resized. But I just wanted to mention, like Mr. Fisk said, the section we're about to move into that Christian Casillas and I are both going to talk about, we do have a piece that doesn't entirely wrap, it doesn't completely close this hole, and so that's still something we should look at, but it does touch on the fact that I have been pushing for a while for, I want to be able to easily adjust subscription sizes as time goes on, because of course usage is going to change, and we don't want that scenario where a customer is receiving too many kilowatt hours of credits. So that is something that we've included in our proposed rules in terms of what's on the disclosure, and how kind of flexible is it to be able to change that subscription size, because in a perfect world, that is, it's not overly flexible where it's changing constantly, because that's confusing to the customer and not administratively feasible for the utility. But I do think that it makes all the sense in the world to have intervals where that can be reassessed and changed without the customer needing to re-enroll entirely, when you're really just trying to make sure that the subscription size remains appropriate.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And really appreciate again, the working group coming together, and it sounds like we'll have some policy issues to decide among the commission. But yeah, and we'll do that. But the rest of it, I certainly appreciate the working group coming together.
Yes, thank you, Alex.
Um, okay, so maybe we should take a break. You okay with 7 minutes, or do you need 10? All right, well, let's do 7. Let's come back at 2:50. Okay, so we're back now, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Fisk, and he'll continue to introduce the panelists or speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now we moved on to Working Group 4, which was concerned with low-income subscriber and general subscriber issues. I'll go ahead and introduce Christian Casillas, the Coalition for Sustainable Communities, New Mexico, for all three of the proposals that he's going to present. Proposal 1 on subscriber organization registration, Proposal 2 on special subscriber provisions, and Proposal 3 on subscriber protections. So Christian, you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Russell. Hello, Chair, Commissioner. I am going to, the first section is going to be, I'm going to hand it over to Alex Passanen again. And I just want to mention that of all of the different sections and proposed amendments that we're going to walk through, probably the most impactful change to the program that will create ease in understanding, as well as ease in payment and enrollment, will be the consolidated billing. So just feel really grateful to the utilities and the working groups and the stakeholders for both of the proposals and the consensus moving towards what feels like moving towards presentation, discussion, and implementation through this next rulemaking process to hopefully bring consolidated billing into the program, which will make a substantial difference. And in one of the next sections, I'll show a little example about kind of the dual bill process. And we've been doing education and outreach to a number of low-income serving organizations. And the piece that remains to be one of the most complicated and hardest to understand aspects of the program has to do with the solar bill credits and the dual billing. And so with that said, I will pass it to Alex for a discussion of the proposed amendments to Section 14.
Thank you very much, Christian. Christian, I mentioned my audio wasn't coming through great. Hopefully you're hearing me all right. I can try something else if not, but I'll keep moving forward unless I hear otherwise. So for Section 14, honestly, for the next 4 sections, hopefully we can move relatively quickly. I know we're coming up against the hour mark that we had originally wanted to close by, but if it feels like we're moving quickly through these, it's not at all because we're hiding anything. We reached almost full consensus on all of these. I'll touch on where we did and didn't as best I can. But for this first one, so it's a fairly light touch in the subscriber organization registration section that we landed on. And it was full consensus in the working group and near full consensus in the larger survey. So one notable change to the language is that we updated the rule to reflect what is already an existing program-wide variance, which is that every subscriber org has to reach their minimum low-income subscription level by the commercial operation date of the facility. You might remember that it was originally 1 year from when you were awarded, and then it was 12 months before your project turned on, and then ultimately it was when your project turned on. And that was really to make sure that providers were able to enroll customers as close to the energization date as possible so that they weren't waiting around for projects and frankly getting confused why they hadn't begun to receive savings. You see a lot of more folks drop off of projects in the first few billing cycles if they're waiting for 6 to 12 months rather than 2 to 6 or something like that. So that is reflected in here. And then the other kind of core element that we put together here has to do with how subscriber organizations are reporting their subscription levels to the program administrator. And NCLAM has done a lot of excellent work in setting up a system so that there is an oversight mechanism. which is of course good. We want to make sure that projects are meeting the minimum commitments that they made in their bid. But something that we've been working on a lot with both utilities and Incline is to try to streamline this process to reduce administrative errors, make sure that the reporting figures are accurate, and that frankly, it's just more accessible for the program administrators. So what we have written here is instead of having a system where subscription providers submit all their customers to the utility, they get those customers validated, they get some rejected, they cure the list, they submit another list, they then figure out who's actually on the farm. So that has to happen. There's no way around that. But what's happening right now is that the providers are then secondarily updating these lists of subscribers in a portal created and administered by the program administrator, which has different fields, different formats. It's just a lot of it's a lot of manual work, but also it just creates a lack of accountability because you could essentially that's going to be a slightly different list unless you're right 100% of the time. And then Incline has to do the work of cross-referencing lists from the utility and lists from the providers. What we've described here is a situation where the provider does that process with the utility. They get their validated list for the month, and then they just share that with the program administrator. So instead of cross-referencing that list that the program administrator will be looking at anyway, they are just getting that one list. It's from the utility, or in this case, we've offered that, the providers have no problem sharing that along to the administrator. They see the actual in effect list every month or on a quarterly basis per their reporting rules. And then they can assess and make sure that the projects are meeting their low income subscription thresholds. I believe the other pieces were alluded to earlier in this workshop, which is that there's additional language proposed here to make sure that subscription organizations are held accountable to meeting the commitments that they made in their bid. I think Commissioner Nyber and maybe someone else as well had mentioned that there didn't seem to be a specific call in the rules for that. So we've proposed that be added here. And then I believe that about wraps it up for this section, unless Christian, I'm missing something, or of course, Commissioner or Chairman or staff, if you have additional questions on this one.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Alex. If there are no questions from the commissioners, I'll move on to section 15, special subscriber provisions. And I'll just walk through kind of each of the changes in here. So the first one is alteration of the language. A low-income customer may demonstrate participation in pre-qualified programs through signing a self-attestation of participation. So currently the rules allow self-attestation of income, but they are not clear about how one proves. So there's two pathways for a household to demonstrate that they meet the income qualifications, either through signing a self-attestation of their income, where that it falls below 80% AMI, or they are enrolled in one of 6 pre-qualified programs. However, the rules don't specify how they demonstrate participation in those programs. And that is something that our organization has heard back from subscriber organizations that it's really left up to them. And they want to avoid asking for information that might feel invasive and cause a household to not want to enroll. And so this is just stating that a household can also sign a self-attestation that they participate in one of the currently 6 pre-qualified programs. Increasing the number of programs that qualify a household for low-income status provides families with alternative options for self-attestation, as well as provides more data for administrators on program participation. and provides a ramp for other pre-qualified programs to direct households to community solar. So, for example, the administrators for currently, say, SNAP and LIHEAP would know about the community solar program, and they could send out information and advertisements about the program to current SNAP and LIHEAP participants. So it provides a way to get the word out to households that would meet the qualifications. The next amendment is increasing the total number of pre-qualified programs. Here we've added 6 additional programs. Each of these programs have income qualification criteria that are highly likely or certainly at or less than 80% AMI. So a number of them are federal programs. Those federal cutoffs would be highly likely to be less than the 80% AMI specifications for this program. And again, the pros for that would be, just as I mentioned, more on-ramps into the program, more ways for a household to qualify if for some reason they don't want to use self-attestation around their income. The cons would be potentially creating increasing the registration complication, adding more choices as opposed to less choices, where self-attestation of income has been is a best practice and simple, but there might be reasons why somebody might choose to self-attest for one of these other programs that they're already enrolled in. Going on to the next proposed amendment is just adding clarification to the definitions of a low-income customer. So the additional language here clarifies that a low-income customer is an individual who is a residential customer of a qualifying utility and is the primary utility account holder or listed as a responsible party on the account. So that language is drawn from statute, but in the prior rules, as you can see here, that clarification wasn't there, and we've been getting information that subscription managers it wasn't clear in their mind who they could be enrolled as a person to qualify for the low income within a household. So, for example, a relative living in the household or a family member, even though the total income of the household might not meet the income qualifications. Whereas if it is the utility account holder, that is typically the head of household. And then the next proposed amendment is adding just a very small tweak in language to what qualifies as a low-income service organization. Currently, the language in the statute defines a low-income service organization as one that provides services or assistance to low-income individuals. The provided amendment here is adding the language whose primary function is to provide services or assistance to low-income individuals. So, example, you can imagine all sorts of organizations that serve a wide range of individuals and would include low-income households, but would not necessarily meet the intention of this program to be receiving a reduction. So, for example, a credit union or an advocacy organization that primarily serves maybe higher income households. And then, and I should mention for all of these, there was near consensus or total consensus from the working group as well as from the wider stakeholder group. The next proposed amendment in here has to do with how often a household has to demonstrate their low-income status. And the amendment proposed here is a low-income customer only needs to prove low-income status at the time of registration with a community solar subscription. So this had a fair amount of conversation within the working group, but there was ultimately more agreement than disagreement that requiring households to re-qualify periodically, for example, every 5 years, would cause additional implementation costs for really all administrative parties involved, the subscription managers, as well as the utilities. The con would be that, almost certainly these programs are, the life of a community solar facility could be in operation for 25 years. Is likely that a household's income status within that time period would change substantially, whether it's coming out of high needs or into high needs. But ultimately, it seems like it would be to the benefit of the program administration, as well as whether or not a household is rising slightly above or below the poverty line, they would likely remain a high needs household. And then the final piece was in an ongoing, making a modification so that in an ongoing basis, the commission shall contract service provider or partner to provide education and outreach to low-income serving organizations and to manage outreach to attract low-income subscribers to the program. Currently, in full disclosure, again, the Coalition of Sustainable Communities New Mexico is on contract to the program administrator to conduct this work. One reason why we believe this is important is that it ensures there is a neutral party that is more an advocate for the low-income households, providing the education and outreach. We've seen that through advertisements from various subscriber organizations. There tends to be, can be some overselling in the languaging of the program. And it's important that there is an entity that can provide education and outreach that doesn't have a vested interest in signing up households. And granted, part of the complications, I think, come from just the nature of the program, where different pieces can be worded about what the bill credit means versus what savings on the electricity bill can mean. And that provides an opportunity for kind of ongoing, consistent messaging coming from one entity as opposed to different parties looking to enroll for their own organization. And with that, I will pause to see if there are any questions about this section or the prior section from the commissioners.
I do have some comments and questions, and I guess this is really where I think we're being asked to do some things that are well beyond our area of expertise, both as an agency and our mission. the statute says that we have to have guidelines that ensure the carve out is achieved each year. The carve out being the 30% low income requirement. So the commission has a duty to ensure that 30% of the subscribers each year fit the income criteria. And what you're suggesting is that they do the initial thing when they subscribe and basically maybe attestation thereafter or something, but I'm not sure that fulfills our statutory obligations. And so I'd like your comment on that. And the second point, what happens when a party signs up meeting that low income criteria, but later falls out of that income criteria? In other words, they start making more income, and to meet that 30% goal, who do we take off the list? Do they fall out of the program? Does somebody else fall out of the program to continue to achieve the 30%? I'd like your comments on both of those.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Regarding the second question, there is currently no language within the rules that specify when or how requalification has to happen. So once a household is enrolled as a low-income household, the current bid commitments are such that that household will be receiving the discount on their solar bill credit for up to 5 years. There is no reason why those benefits wouldn't be extended beyond that. And there is no reason, and there's no language in the current rule that specifies that the household, if their income status changes within the times in which they're enrolled, that they would need to notify the utility. And so the proposal here is to clarify where there is no language that a household only needs to qualify at the time of enrollment. And so the consensus or near consensus from the group was that the complications of continually having to have households certify would prove a challenge administratively and potentially cause confusion for the households. Does that answer that, the second question?
Not really, because I think it's wise on the part of the developers to have 50% meeting that criteria going in, so we don't have the situation. But if they cut it close and it's 30% and one person all of a sudden does not meet that criteria, and assuming that none of the other people now meet that criteria, you got a problem, because we have to ensure that 30% is reserved for people that do meet the criteria, which means somebody got to drop out.
Commissioner, and all, I saw Alex had his hands up. So there is currently no way, once a household is enrolled as a low-income household and they remain participating in the program, there is no check as to in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whether or not that household still meets the income criteria, the low income criteria. On the books in the registration, they will forever remain a low income household participating in the program unless they withdraw from the program.
Well, I wish that's what the statute said, but that's not what the statute says, and our rules are going to have to reflect the statutory constraints that we are under. And we are under a constraint that says that 30% each year have to meet that income criteria. And if it doesn't, our rules are going to have to deal with that situation, both in terms of making sure that the people who are enrolled that meet the criteria do in fact meet the criteria. Believe me, I object to our having to do this, but the statute says it. And then secondly, we're going to have to address what happens if we've cut it so close that one person no longer meeting that criteria. What happens? Somebody has to fall out to get back to that 30% threshold, or somebody under that threshold has to come in. And I think our rules are going to have to contemplate that because we have the statutory duty each year. It's not just at the beginning, it's each year we have to ensure that carve out. In fact, the statute says the commission shall issue guidelines to ensure the carve out is achieved each year. I don't see how we get around that.
Commissioner, I don't think I'm explaining it clearly. I'll let Alex, subscription manager, explain it more clearly than I am. It is their job to make sure that as households drop out, for example, a low income registered household drops out, that they enroll new low income households into the program. But if, as an example, the program is energized, all the subscriptions are filled, and there's 50% low income, and then other anchor tenants and some small commercial, for example. At the end of year one, year two, if no customers have changed, that will still have 50% low income registered households on there. But there is no audit that is required to be done to ensure that those low income registered households that were low income a year ago, nothing has changed in their income status. They are still on the books as a low income household.
There's no audit, but this commission has a duty to follow the statute and to ensure that at least 30% are meeting that criteria.
Alex, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you for the comment, Commissioner. I would just offer that I think part of the disconnect here in the way that we were interpreting the statutory language is that we still do have to make sure that the carve-out is achieved each year, in that we are reporting on a quarterly basis for the life of the project that we are serving. In the case of all of the active projects, 50% of the capacity to low-income customers. I understand that 30% is the statutory minimum, and it's not a given that every project forever will commit to 50, but that is, of course, the current scenario. But we didn't interpret that statutory language as you have to re-verify, like a customer who's on the project in year one and who's on the project in year two. We verified their income. That's been reported to the program. As long as that customer is still enrolled in the project on a quarterly basis for every year, you're still meeting that. Of course, if that project drops out, you enroll a new customer, you verify their income. So I just wanted to explain that's how definitely everybody in our working group viewed the statutory language, that the carve-out is achieved each year. I would say I think probably a bit of background from the group and folks who have more experience working in the state in terms of the re-verifying was we had a lot of discussions about income mobility in the state in general, and frankly, just how rare it is that people, the amount of households that are moving out of the low income threshold that's defined in this program. That's of course not to say it doesn't happen, and your point is valid, and I appreciate that, and we can think more about that. But I think those two pieces in conjunction was what we focused on in the working group, and then again, there could be more language around this, but the fact that every project is serving 50%, and the statutory minimum is 30%, it doesn't feel that the projects in this phase are at risk of dropping below that. But I understand that's not a neat solution in the rules, and your point is valid. But I just wanted to share that's what I remember from the ongoing conversations in the group on this.
Well, I'm hopeful that maybe this is an issue that will actually be encountered, because that means people in New Mexico are having some prosperity. But I would suggest to Mr. Fisk that we need to probably go beyond what's being suggested to make sure that we're complying with our statutory obligations, and that we have a rule that addresses the two issues I raised. Because, you know, if some developer cuts it close, 30%, 31%, 32%, there could be a change. You know, a 24-year-old meets the criteria when they're 24, when they're 30, maybe they're above the 80% line, and doing well in their endeavors, and their incomes increased, and so they no longer meet the criteria. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect some movement in that regard. And well, I this may be an academic exercise if everybody's doing 50%, but if they're cutting it close, it may be an actual issue for us, and our rules should certainly contemplate something that's foreseeable, and I would say this is foreseeable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I wonder if I worked on another piece of legislation the last year that had to do with income qualification for households related to solar, not community solar, but rooftop solar. And one of the proposals there was that an option would be that the utilities simply send out something with the bill periodically, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, that just asks a household that they have that is registered with them as meeting the income qualification to basically self-certify that they meet the income criteria. Is that something that feels like it would address this concern of yours?
Yes, I may be a little concerned about self-certification, because, you know, as a governmental agency, there may be a mechanism by which we can acquire some of that information through other agencies. I don't know, but I really don't like the fact that the legislature has put us in this situation, because we're not an agency that's really prepared to engage in these types of inquiries. And so I guess we could do some self-certification, but there'd have to be something in the rules that would cause some repercussions if they are untruthful in their self-certification. So, I mean, you know, it's this commission that's having to put in the rules that ensure that everyone in the program meets that, or not everyone in the program, everyone who is low income equals 30% or more of the subscriptions in that particular facility. And the statute says we have to do it each year. So we're going to have to do something to reflect that we've met our statutory obligation, and there may be a variety of ways to do it, but if it's a self-certification, there would have to be some component of what happens if people, don't speak truthfully to us. There has to be some repercussions to that, or else we're probably maybe not fulfilling our duty to ensure that occurs. So just some issues for Mr. Fisk to try to wrestle with and figure out.
Thank you, Commissioner. Shall we move on to the next section, section 16, subscriber protections?
Yes, please.
So, and maybe I'll let Alex take the first part of this, which the proposed modification here specifies that the uniform disclosure form, which must be given to every subscriber before they subscribe, it states that it can be updated from time to time by the commission or the program administrator. Alex, would you like to add some color to that?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, that piece is really just to allow for the scenario where the disclosure form can be updated rather than set in stone from the original version. There's some minor language in here on making the subscription size estimated and also making sure that it's in AC, just because the existing rule language didn't match what was actually on the disclosure, and that's in the guidebook. And then the bigger pieces that felt really important to the group are the following two additions, which is A, to be very prescriptive that the disclosure should include the administrative cost rider, which my hope, and I can only speak from Pulse's perspective, but that is certainly in all the disclosures that we presented to customers, but it seemed like there was potentially a lack of clarity on having to include that as part of the overall costs and program experience. So wanted to make sure that was prescriptive, that that's in there. And then the following edition was a uniform visual example, which shows estimated net savings based on the average residential customer usage. So that will be both in dollars and percent of bill savings. And the reason we added this is because there's an excellent flyer that comes in front of the disclosure when you're presenting this to customers. But there was no visual on what this would look like for a bill and what people should expect. So kind of the whole goal of this was that, and we worked very hard on this in the working group, is to come up with a uniform example that you can make sure every residential customer sees so that they have a reasonable expectation of what their savings experience is going to look like. And it looks like Christian pulled up an example of what we were thinking of.
And this is something that we've been using in our education and outreach, and the various subscriber organizations have some version of this as well as the program administrator on their website. And the attempt here was because it can be confusing how the solar bill credits are paid separately, how those are then integrated into the electricity bill, and then what the resulting discounts are. So one of the things that and probably a number of people on this call and in the room there might tell you that for income qualified household, they receive a 28% savings on their electricity bill. The reality is a 28% discount on their solar bill credit, which will likely translate into something like a 15 to 20% annual savings on their electricity bill. And so having some sort of a required uniform visual example that makes that clarification, both in kind of receiving two bills as well as how the discounts each month might look and what the result in annual savings would be, we feel is important and may help to make the communication from the different subscriber management organizations more consistent.
Thank you, Christian. And then the last pieces here, I think Christian had kind of alluded to this already, but essentially making very clear that the product is marketed appropriately in terms of the discount off of the bill credits. And then also making it very clear that, of course, any, door-to-door solicitors have to comply with all local solicitation laws. That was really the only piece that there was any lack of consensus, and that really just came from some folks in the working group thinking that that was unnecessary to have in a rule because you're basically just stating that you need to comply with the local laws. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think more people than not in the group saw little harm of having it on there. But those are the last two provisions that are in this proposal.
And the one nuance with those two pieces that kind of restate local law is that it specifies that the program administrator or commission can impose a penalty for non-compliance with those pieces. And so with that, before we move on to the final section that the low income working group discussed, any questions or thoughts from the commission on this section?
I do have one comment. I think it's within this section. If you look at page 53, it's subscription agreements, paragraph B. It says that non-material changes include administrative updates, adjustments to subscription size that are less than or equal to 25% of original subscription size, changes in subscriber location within the same utility service territory, or reassignment to another approved project administered by the same subscriber organization. And earlier this year, we had a minor movement of a facility, and the question arose whether or not they had to get approval from all the subscribers to accommodate that movement. And I understand minor movements should not really impact the underlying agreement. But I am concerned if the change is to a location within the same utility service territory, which frankly is quite large, where a subscriber may be wanting to be a subscriber in the local community solar facility. And they're not interested in one that's across the state. And likewise, the last part, reassignment to another approved project. I may want to subscribe to one that's in or around my community, but I have no interest in what goes on in the adjacent county or 6 counties over. And so I'm wondering why you would deem those to be non-material changes. They seem material to me, and I would want to be informed and decide whether I want to I'll call it invest in that project.
Just to clarify, Commissioner, you were smart in printing that out. My laptop died. But is that in reference to the subscriber moving as opposed to the facility?
The facility moving, that non-material changes include changes in subscriber location within the same utility service area or reassignment to another approved project administered by the same subscriber organization. I guess the first one would be the subscriber. I guess that would be the subscriber moves within the territory, but that really makes no sense because the subscriber is not asking for the amendment. It's the subscriber organization. But the last part, reassignment to another approved project administered by the same subscriber organization, I think that's another project.
Yeah, I think what that the
The first one you make. Administrative.
Pulling this up too. I don't remember the project moving piece but I'll try to pull this up.
Oh, can I provide a clarification? I think I may know what this is about. Now, I wasn't in this working group, but something that came up this year was, and it may have been the subject of a petition that I was not handling, was that some subscriber organizations who have multiple projects wanted to list on a single agreement with a single subscriber all of their projects. Like they have five of them or something, and say, we're going to assign you this project as needed, because each facility has to meet the 30% low income subscriber requirement. So that was a way of aiding them in being able to meet the facility based 30%. And the idea would be to disclose right from the beginning to the subscriber that they might be assigned to any one of those five. Say, am I right about that, Alex and Christian?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Russell. So I just finally pulled up this exact section. So yeah, it doesn't have to do with the project moving, but what Russell just described is exactly right, where if a single subscriber organization has multiple projects in the utility territory, that petition had asked to list multiple, so that the customer could agree that they basically could be assigned to a project that would deliver savings first. And that really captured that came out of an actual scenario where the petitioners wanted to make sure that the subscribers who had enrolled first started to get their savings first, because that is, in my experience, always what the subscriber wants. And generally, often, I mean, it's fairly rare that the customers actually have the chance to live very close to the farms. So there were scenarios then where, because a customer enrolled first and we put them on the project that was scheduled to energize first, and then that project got delayed for whatever reason for 6 months, we wanted to make sure that they could get on the project that was energizing a couple months after that, without having to go back and have them re-enroll entirely. So that would have been the purpose of including both of those in the subscriber agreement or the disclosure. And it's a similar concept to the subscription size piece, which I mentioned earlier, which is just that there's no reason necessarily that you couldn't do this already, given how the disclosure is set up. But for the sake of clarity on what's on the disclosure, we wanted to make sure that customers understand that their subscription would be resized within certain bounds to make sure that it matches their usage, so that we avoid the scenario that we discussed earlier, where over time their usage changes and the subscription's not sized exactly right, especially since that's only ever in the interest of the subscriber, especially within that band. So those are those two pieces. And then, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong about the project location, but I don't think that was what was intended in here, if that's what you're saying.
Well, then I'd have two comments. Number one, you did not address the slight movement of a project, and that does need to be a non-material change that would not prompt getting a new contract.
No, sorry. Is that's not in the, I don't see that in the, this is section 17B. I'm not seeing anything about the project moving in it, so that's why I'm struggling to respond to that piece, because I don't remember having that in there.
I think we're talking about two different things.
Yeah.
Commissioner Nybert is asking about a project moving. So this is before it's constructed, moving to
Okay.
another location. But I think this section is about the subscriber and saying they're assigned to project A and now they're assigned to project B. If it's, like Affordable Solar, for example, who has two projects in the utilities footprint.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that clarification. I think I did something confusing because what I was referring to is what's in the last part of B, or reassignment to another approved project. So I'm sorry, I may have confused that myself.
I think, okay, thank you. And I think that other piece that says changes in subscriber location within the same territory. So that's a slightly separate piece, which is that if a customer is on a project in their territory and they move, they can stay on that project. They don't have to get kicked off that project if they themselves moved and they're still in the utility territory.
Yes, that I have no issue with that now. That's been pointed out. The issue that is not addressed is if a facility is required to move in the case that we heard, 400 feet or 400 yards, relatively minor distance. And the issue was whether or not that required the company to go back and get new subscriber agreements with each of the parties who had become subscribers. And I'm suggesting to you that issue is not addressed in this language. The second point that I have a concern with is if you came to me and said, invest in this project. I'm from Roswell, and I say, okay, I'll do Roswell, but then you move me to Catherine County. That may not be something I would want to do. Well, it wouldn't happen between Chaves and Catherine County because they're two different utilities. But say Chaves County versus Curry County, same utility, same service area. I may be willing as a citizen of Roswell to invest in the one in my hometown. I'm not particularly interested in the one in Clovis. Yet this language would say that that's not a material change, and you don't have to get my permission, even though I really have no desire to do the other one. And I'm suggesting that maybe that is a material change that should require you to come to me to see if it's okay to move me from Chaves County to Curry County.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Alex, would it be okay if I address that one? This is Dylan.
Please.
On the first one, if, for example, we petition to move our site to another site due to issues we have with the state land office and cultural sensitivities, the timeline to subscribe people is around anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and construction is around 6 to 12 months. So we will have completed the move before we start subscribing. So we won't need to have people sign with one project and then in one location and then move it. So I think that one should be okay, because we're not going to pre-subscribe people before we're approved to move a site. Does that make sense?
Well, it may make sense, but it means somebody misrepresented this situation to us earlier.
Yeah, and I don't think that's one of the non-ministerial one. But another option on the second one, though, so for example, we have a project in Roswell. If you'd prefer to be on the Roswell one, Alex, one thing we could look at here is just that when a customer requests a specific project, we only put that project on the list. Whereas if you're, let's say you're in P&M territory, and we have 5 projects in P&M, then you'd have the option to pick one or have all 5, and then you're given the first available. I think based on customers like yours that may want to be on a particular project, to Alex's point, a lot of customers just want whichever one's going to give them savings sooner. And so that's the flexibility we were asking for.
You might look at the language and maybe tighten it up in one respect and maybe expand it in another.
Oh yeah, thank you, Dylan, and thank you for permission. I understand it now. I appreciate you your patience on that one. So, we can clarify the subscriber preference for being open to being on a project that gets some savings first versus a subscriber retaining the right to stick to a project if they don't want to get moved to a product that would deliver savings more quickly. I think probably that's just from our experience, it's because customers want savings as quickly as possible pretty much all the time, but I totally understand the scenario that you're describing where if you live near a certain project and you want to be on that project, you should have the right to retain that subscription. So we can take a look at the language and make sure that's captured. I think if we're now that, because that just moved us into this last section for subscription agreements, so I can talk through the other pieces on there. If there are any we haven't already touched on, I think the other main piece in here is the description of basically a system for utilities and providers to exchange data that is efficient and reduces the amount of errors on manual back and forth. So this is something that's honestly, since this language is put in here, has come a long way just via work directly between providers and the utilities. But there still remains a few scenarios where there's a lot of individual back and forth on these processes rather than having a way to just share a CSV file with all the customers in there so that the utility can officially receive them all and then go through the process that they need to on their side to approve and review and reject and then return the validated list to the provider. So that's what this language was intended to capture, the language about an electronic system for sharing that data. And that the last piece out on that in terms of customer experience, part of the reason this has become a concern for some providers is that because of the way it's set up in some territories, really just actually one of the 3 territories with Xcel Energy, customers are just not able to get verified by the utility within a reasonable time frame, and that is unfortunately risking them not being able to be allocated to the project once the project turns on and starts delivering them savings. So basically trying to be proactive about making sure that doesn't happen to customers for reasons out of their and the provider's control. Of course, there needs to be, it shouldn't be instantaneous that the customer is approved or rejected with their subscriber consent form, but having some reasonable bounds for how quickly those are turned around seems like a reasonable solution to us in the working group.
Thank you. Looks like we don't have any questions on this one. And so appreciate the presentations. And I think now, Russell, we could move on to working group 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our final working group is working group 5 concerning project relocation. And there's a single proposal there that will be presented by John Gardner of SPS.
Yeah, thank you, Russell, and thank you, Chairman Aguilera and Commissioner Nybert, just for the patience to get here. I'm going to try to keep this quick, just to be mindful of everybody's time. Just like I mentioned in our introduction, our small working group's goal was to attempt to codify Commissioner Nybert's concurrence on site relocations and variances for site relocations. Our group, comprised of peers of mine, Mark Martinez from PNM and Adam Harper with OE Solar, were able to reach full consensus on the concurrence in our proposal here. And I will say that this was, provided to us really well, and we really didn't have to strike through or modify anything. If anything, what we did was provide additional language and maybe just a few guardrails around some of the locational challenges. So we did propose to add a new subsection to 17.9.573.12, and it would be a new subsection J. We have, I believe, 7 or 8 bullet points here that I can briefly go over pretty quickly. First one being that the point of interconnection, so a relocation of a community solar site shall not change the designated point of interconnection identified in the RFP bid. If relocation does require a new point of common coupling or a point of interconnection, the new location must remain on the same parcel and be located on an adjacent parcel secured by a valid lease or utility approved easement. One statement here that was helpful in my mind was that the IOU and the subscriber organization shall jointly select the compliant PCC that does prioritize safety and reliability. In my own personal experience, we've been a huge proponent of developer scoping meetings and sharing really useful data and looking at, granular details of where, our overhead pole is going to be, where the customer's first takeoff point is going to be, and coordinating that clearly between parties. And so if there was a proposed relocation, we'd expect that same kind of meeting where we're going to look, on Google Earth, or we may get out in the field and verify that the new proposed PCC does meet safety and reliability goals. Additionally, from the concurrence, we talked about distance to three-phase line. So if it's less than 1 mile of the nearest three-phase circuit, that relocated site must still retain and be within that 1 mile radius. And then again, just like we had talked about in Section A, that if there was a relocation, that there would be communication between the utility and the developer to make sure that there's mutual agreement of where that new point of interconnection location is going to be. If we have a location that's in proximity to three-phase that's greater than the mile from the three-phase circuit, then that relocation shall not increase the distance from that circuit or the original PCC as well. Going through the list, we talk about ownership consistency. So landowner of the original and relocated parcel must be the same. From previous experience, that definitely can impact siting and land rights, obtaining easements, working with different landowners. So when we have ownership consistency, that does provide a clear path to avoiding delays. So we do believe that that's important. On site control, we do also note here that the SO must maintain legally binding site control of that relocated parcel. An important section to me, and from what I've seen on some of these projects, that there are no adverse cost impacts from relocation. So in subsection F of what we're proposing here, this relocation shall not increase the interconnection or other costs for projects already selected. And then there's additional language here that says the utility must validate any proposed relocation for a potential restudy. Any new studies triggered by the relocation shall be paid for by the relocating developer. What I've seen in other jurisdictions and even in New Mexico as well, when there is a slight change in the POI, that could require that a system impact study get updated. It may not be a full-blown restudy that's going to take the 40 to 45 business days. It may be much quicker, but it does require the utility and engineering consultants who are performing the study to update, load flow models and making sure that the protection settings that were, contingent on a specific location are still suitable for the relocated place. So we do believe that, if there is a need for a restudy, that, that should be borne by the developer that's proposing the relocation. Section G talks about no change in project size. So we're not addressing project size here. I believe the interconnection rules are pretty clear on material modification and what is required and what is not required. And so we believe that a project's nameplate capacity shall remain identical to what was stated in the RFP bid. And then lastly, material impact review. The hosting utility must evaluate that relocation request for material impacts on, the project and other queued projects. Any additional study costs, just like we mentioned above, shall be borne by that relocating developer. So that's a quick summary of the proposed language that, could help codify this variance request. I think it's really helpful. It's a good starting point to maybe avoid some of the back and forth and the questions on what is allowed, what is not allowed. And so I want to maybe just leave it there and see if there's any reactions or questions from staff or commissions.
Thank you for that overview. I think that we don't have any questions for you. Thank you for the explanation.
Sir, thank you. That's all I have, Russell.
Thank you.
So we're getting close. And so the next item on the agenda is closing remarks and the discussion of next steps. Thank you for providing draft tariff language. I understand that some of these are competing proposals, and also that with some of these, there are still some policy calls that the commission will need to make. But I think we're sitting here in a much better position than we were months ago, thanks to the efforts that you have put into this. And so, Commissioner Iber, I think we're probably at a point where we have a draft language that we can include in a proposed NOPR. Obviously, we would need to make some decisions about which proposals to include and then hear back from the stakeholders and utilities about what their thoughts are on each of those proposals. That seems like the logical next step for me is directing our staffer to put together a draft that we could look at and seek individual commissioner feedback.
I can absolutely do that.
Have any closing remarks or
No,
reaction?
I'd just like to thank everyone for the tremendous time and effort that they've given to go through these issues. It was somewhat of an experiment. We've learned some lessons from maybe the first go around. Maybe we can be more efficient and address some of those issues and maybe do away with some issues that have arisen the past number of months, and maybe make it a process that is quicker, maybe one that gets these projects actually built and constructed in a much prompter time frame. And certainly, I know the legislature is interested in seeing the projects come online, and we appreciate the efforts. I think the first one was 2 months ago. You had the official groundbreaking, not groundbreaking, the official, I guess, phase of when energy was being produced there in Belen, and as other communities are seeing these projects go up and seeing those come online, I think hopefully we will have learned from some of those experiences and can come up with some good rules. I think there's a number of things that I probably raised that maybe need attention. I hope, Mr. Fisk, that you'll look at some of those and maybe incorporate those before we see a draft. But I think that a lot of work's been done. I think we have a good place to at least start engaging in a discussion at this level, and hopefully come up with some rules that are at least somewhat agreeable by the parties that deal with these day in and day out. And maybe not everybody gets what they want, but certainly I hope that they find that the rules that are in place are something that is workable, something that is attainable and may smooth out the process. And so I appreciate your indulgence with us, not only today but throughout the process, and appreciate your efforts to make community solar something that we can all be proud of, and certainly meet the ideals that the legislature put before us. Thank you.
Yeah. And then the one kind of lingering thing that I have is with respect to the project solicitation and evaluation, where we have the 4 different proposals. We can certainly take those and pick and refine, but there are 4 proposals there, and if you can narrow it down even further amongst the working group, and also want to check, I guess, how was that working group represented? Did it have like utilities and other stakeholders? Okay.
Unfortunately, we couldn't pick.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's why we ended up with four. And as you know, there's a petition for now a fifth option to bring on, a wait list. So, things we discussed in that working group, and it's, unfortunately, we've left it in your hands now. Not unfortunately, but it's in your hands now to sort of see which policy goal seems the best to you, and then potentially we talked about a hybrid. We talked about trying to integrate each of the lessons learned into each one and create a Frankenstein, but it just wasn't really feasible based on differences of opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's understood. We are here to make decisions. So
In that regard, don't be surprised if maybe we put some alternatives in the proposed rule and just see what the public has to say about those alternatives. Because it looks to me like there may be some good, reasonable alternatives there that aren't exactly alike, but we'd like feedback to see what people think about the various alternatives. Obviously, at the end of the day, we'll have to pick something, but don't be surprised if the rule that comes out for review has more than one way to skin the cat.
yeah. Well, thank you again for your efforts so far and for sticking with us and your presentations today. I feel like we're in a much better spot, and just really appreciate the work that you put into it. So I think with that, won't keep you any longer, and we're adjourned.